and welcome to Adventures in Local Marketing from BrightLocal, the marketing podcast for marketers who want to do good local SEO. In the upcoming episodes, I'm going to be chatting with a smorgasbord of marketers who are each going to bring their unique insight into the local marketing landscape. And each episode will serve up a one-stop overview of our guest's chosen topic area, and it's going to give you tips and tactics that you'll be able to dash off and implement right away. I'm your host, I'm Claire Carlisle, and I'm BrightLocal's local search expert, as well as a chartered marketer with 20 years of experience of working with local businesses of all shapes and sizes. And today we are going to be chatting with Dayna Lucio. Dayna is a senior SEO strategist at Amsive and has almost a decade's experience executing and developing comprehensive strategies for multi-location and franchise brands. Her experience in local SEO has spanned a variety of industries, including health, beauty and spa, fitness, home improvement, and more. Hello, Dayna, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Claire. Great to be here.
Thank you for being with us today. We are today going to be chatting about your experiences of making SEO and local SEO programs work together, which I think is a really important topic that doesn't get talked about enough. So we get to give some airtime to that today and get an insight into all of your experiences. So should we just dive straight in?
Let's go for it.
Let's go for it. All right.
Yeah.
Let's have a think about what we mean and what you mean when we talk about SEO versus local SEO. What does that mean to you, and what's the difference between those two parts?
I think when I think about SEO, I'm thinking about foundational SEO. I'm thinking about if you're having a multi-location business, thinking about corporate websites. And then when I'm thinking about local, more of like location pages, getting local intent, keyword rankings, GBP, all of that good stuff. And I think that to be successful, especially in a like franchise space, that you have to focus on both efforts. You have to make sure that your site is, technically sound, that Google's able to crawl, understand, index your content, as well as coming up with strategies to not only get people interested at the local level, but understanding what types of products and services that you offer at that informational kind of keyword intent. And I think that can really come at the corporate level versus creating tons and tons of content otherwise.
And I know we sort of touched on at the start on in the intro, some of the types of businesses that you work with. Could you just, give us an idea of the types of scale of businesses that you work with? Because later on, we're going to talk about how those pieces fit together for those types of businesses. So, if you could just tell us, don't have to name them unless you want to, but what type of sectors, what type of organizational structure, what types of businesses, how many, what sort of scale?
Yeah, so, in my experience, I've worked in a lot of different industries, fitness, health and kind of spa, some healthcare, and then I've had, the ability to work in finance a little bit with like banking and also a little bit of e-commerce, kind of like retail stores. Mm-hmm. So kind of have run the gamut on that. And then from a like standpoint of like locations, it's been everything from maybe a single, location business here in Nashville to multi-location, which I consider multi-location to be, kind of like that mid-range, maybe like 20 plus, something around there. And then large-scale franchises, which with franchises, you're getting into the hundreds, maybe 500s, depending on the, how big of a national reach they have.
And different sets of challenges as well with regard to like structure as well for franchises, which we may or may not touch upon as we get there. Another unscheduled question: how did you come into your work as like a general marketer or like as an SEO or a tech SEO and then discover local SEO, or did you come in with like just working with local businesses? I'm really interested to know.
I came in from content marketing. So I started off in content. I have a big background in content, and then I worked at an agency that specialized in just local businesses for franchises. So we worked like just got thrown into that franchise space, building out kind of like content for location pages, and then really got interested in the problem solving aspects of SEO, and kind of have been able to transition that probably about 10 years ago. But since then, I've primarily worked, at the agency side, and now, at Amsive, working and helping our local clients has really been a passion of mine.
Yeah, I love that. So a little bit of everything along the way, as so many like SEOs and digital marketers end up touching a little bit of all of the parts of SEO. So that, I think that's very interesting. So coming back to that relationship between SEO, all of those parts, tech, on page, off page, blah blah blah, and then local SEO, which is sort of talked about as this little bit that sits on its own, which it doesn't,
Yes.
is seeing the relationship between the two, or making the most of it, or whatever it is that something that you feel is often missed and should be done better? So I was just interested in your viewpoints on what is the problem that we have here.
I think you kind of touched on it, right, where it might be perceived as like two different, completely different things, but it's not. I do think that if you're going to do SEO in general, I think you have to have those kind of foundational like skills. So you need to understand content, you need to understand technical, and I think adding on to those skills is just the local atmosphere and understanding how that works and ties back, to your larger like strategies, especially with your clients. They obviously want to get customers in the door, and there's different ways to do that. And it's not just local sometimes. It's building up those relationships, informing customers, building that customer journey, and driving them, to finally make that local kind of transaction, become a member, come try a trial class, things like that.
Do you find that in your experience, when sometimes SEO is a little bit late to the gets called to the table a little bit late when people are making decisions, and people say sprinkle the SEO magic on it? Do you find that you're seeing the same type of thing with the do the local SEO magic now, when the local SEO should have been coming in at the time when you were planning out the information architecture and which products and services to focus on? Is that something that you see as well? Is there a difference?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's surprising, when you maybe get a business and they have locations and then you don't see local pages built out. Maybe they have their GBP profiles and everything's pointing back to just like a general location page. Maybe it's pointing to a contact page, the home page, whatever. But
Homepage, yeah.
it's, yeah, whatever it is. And I think that, it's such a big opportunity, to just build out those location pages and to build them out the right way versus just the, when you kind of see that almost doorway approach where it's just multiple pages that have, maybe the name, address, phone information is different, and then it's just copy paste, insert city name. Um, so I like to come in and I would, prefer to be in there from the ground up when we're building out site architecture, coming up with the plan of how you're going to build the site. But I think there's a way to dive in and build local pages, do it the right way, or fix what's already been built in some cases.
Yeah, retrospectively it's always a bit trickier, isn't it? But
Always.
that's just what happens. So knowing that you have like worked with a range of businesses, all different shapes and sizes, we've got the franchises, organisations with many locations, and I think that's really relevant for our audience. In your experience, are there any specific complexities for those types of sites in terms of either making SEO and local SEO work together, or just SEO in general?
I think from the franchise space, especially, there's always, it's kind of dependent on how that franchisee franchisor like relationship is set up. How much access do the franchise owners have to like their location pages, their GBP? Is it all run through corporate? What are those brand standards? What content is boilerplate and can't be changed? I think understanding that complex relationship can be tricky, especially because it's going to change from brand to brand. Um, and then as well as when you have a lot of locations in one area, like a New York, Chicago, understanding maybe where like territories are, um, how close each other, businesses are, because now they're kind of competing because one's on this street, one's on, the south side. So I think understanding that can be really complex and difficult.
Mm. Just what you said there about franchisee, franchisor, and access to things like I've got experience of just a couple of franchises, and I've seen some different stuff in terms of what the franchisee can actually update within ACMS or whatever it is. What would you say is the best type of setup that you've seen, or guidance for the franchisees to really make the most of their access to those pages? Because I've seen some terrible things, and I think I've seen some maybe reasonable things. So I was interested to see, what would you say would be the best setup when it comes to access, or what they should be doing?
I think it's important, if franchisees have access to certain parts of their location pages, maybe it's, team bios, maybe it is writing their own success stories, or they have some kind of, not like a blog, but some kind of area where they can go and highlight their own local, events, promotions, things that are going on. I know in that space, it's a lot of, promotions have to go through like a corporate, but then they all get their branded material, comes down. So I think it depends on that relationship and how that brand is set up. But I've seen a lot of really good ways that franchisors give, the people that have bought into their franchise the tools that they need to succeed, whether it's introducing them, to the SEO agency, giving them access in something like an office hours, um, and as well as like being promotional, helping them out and giving them the tools that they need to market their business. And I think that starts from the ground up. It starts with how to promote yourself when it's the grand opening, giving information on the website about new locations opening, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Have you seen some really good uh, like internal operating procedures for training, um, like really good support? You've seen some really good models? It sounds like that sounds lovely. The office hours. Have you delivered any of those to franchisees?
Yeah, we've did that a lot. At my old agency, we would do office hours and give the franchisees, the opportunity to come and ask questions, right? Why, you know, getting a one-on-one look when you're trying to scale everything. It's hard sometimes to look one-on-one at locations, but to be able to answer questions, maybe explain why content or something's appearing a certain way. A lot of office hours, I think, in general, is just educating people on SEO.
Mm. Every time you say something, it really starts my brain just like it starts thinking and thinking. I think that's quite an interesting scenario, because as you're running these office hours in your role, not as an in-house marketer for the franchise. You're running that office hour as a worker within that agency, having a relationship probably with the franchisor rather than the franchisees. So there's all of those layers of having to understand and reflect back in a good way upon the franchisor, because you might think that there could be a better setup and you're dealing with problems that the franchisee has that could be dealt if there was like a CMS change. Have you ever experienced being pulled in maybe potentially some different directions because you're wearing so many different hats?
I think so. I think in any organization, there's always going to be that push and pull, and maybe that internal controversies are, I guess, would be a way to say it. But as an outsider, you're there to give the perspective of being a partner. And I think that's always important whenever, just as an agency partner in general, we work together, we're going after the same goals, and then really coming in as that expert, being able to explain things, tell them what you can and can't do based on, maybe something that isn't in your control, like your categories, right? In Google Business Profile, we have to select the categories based on what our options are, right? So I think if you have an outside, sometimes it's just that outside voice can really get through to people.
Mm-hmm. I think that sounds brilliant. We all want Dayna to come and do some office hours now for everyone's franchisees. You can book her here. Um, so having a little think about when you're working, because you're a general SEO strategist, aren't you? You're working on everything, aren't you, as your job function? But when you're prioritizing local SEO work on specific locations, is there somewhere that you start in terms of if there's awful reviews, do you want to tackle that straight away, or is it consistency of data management? Is it who has access to what and where? Is there anything in particular that you think is like, oh, you need to sort this, or have you just got like a checklist that you go through, which is, I don't know, what do you do? How do you do it, Dayna?
Typical SEO answer, but it depends on the scenario.
Boo.
I know. However, I do think that consistency of business naming convention, phone number, address is important, right? It should be consistent across your website, in your local business schema. It should be consistent in your GBP profile, your Yelp profiles, whatever other citations you're using, because that's how people are getting to your business, right? If the phone number's incorrect, that's a bad experience for users. You're losing customers. Same thing with directions. If you go to an address and you're expecting to show up at a spa and it's not a spa, you likely just lost a customer. So I think that's really important, and not only with consistency, just for Google in general, right? Being able to fact check the information, but there needs to be a source of truth of where your business is located, what it's called, and that can be confusing for customers. So I think that's really important. But there is of course tackling negative reviews if there's a way to come up with themes of like what people are saying, because it could be like a brand level problem, or it could just be location by location. And in the back end of GBP or a lot of citation management tools, you can get like a bulk export and kind of see who the outliers are. And I think that's also important too, because then that gives the business owners something to kind of look internally in, because reviews, they matter. It's, it can keep people from engaging with your business if they're seeing a lot of negative reviews.
Yeah, who knew? Reviews are
Who knew?
important.
Yeah, they are.
Wow, really amazing. So it sounds like you're anything that's an emergency, you're going to tackle pretty much straight away. But other than that, you're working through do you audit? Do you have a big audit process when you take on a new client? And does that fit within like the local SEO as being a part of a bigger audit with regard to how does that work for you?
Yeah, I think auditing, especially when you bring on a new client, is really important, because I think it helps you to build your strategy. Auditing along with looking at historical performance, and then really understanding what your client wants. What are their goals? What are their strengths, weaknesses, challenges that they've faced? And what have they maybe done before and didn't have work, right? You can run into clients that are maybe frustrated because they built out all these location pages and sub pages and all of this, and then you show up and you're telling them that that's not going to work because half of those sub pages are duplicate content and they're not indexed and all these things. So I think it's balancing that and kind of figuring out what needs to be tackled. But I do think that auditing is really important, both from a technical location page, GBP, and even content, when we're going back to that kind of national corporate page, is being able to look at the content that they're providing and, from the source of truth, the corporate entity, what are they saying about the services they offer? Are they providing that informational content, especially around, you know, fitness classes? I think, example like waxing, massages, people have a lot of questions about those things. And I think the corporate website needs to clearly explain their processes, answer the questions people have about those kind of things that come up.
Mm-hmm. When you, and I know you might say it depends to this, but you said when you work with new clients, you're looking at, they obviously have to have the internal knowledge of, what are our objectives, who is our audience, who are our competitors. Do you tend to find that people or organisations that you work with already have that knowledge in a robust way, or do you find yourself having to tease that information out of them to allow you to work on strategy?
Most clients, in my experience at least, have had personas built or have a clear kind of idea of who their customers are. I think when we start talking about competitors, that's where it can get a little bit tricky. You'll have especially if it's a big brand, they'll have their national competitors that they're like keeping an eye on, that they're really similar to. It might be another multi-location business that's kind of a similar model. And I think really talking to them, it's a partnership, understanding what makes them different, what we can really highlight is important. And then when you're getting down to like actually, local SEO and looking region to region, you're going to start seeing either smaller multi-location businesses, or you're going to see those local shops, which are also your competitors. Depending on the market, some people are going to be maybe a little bit turned off by like a chain business and really want to support local. So you have to figure out, from the top up, what's our brand perception? What are people thinking? What are the questions they're asking? So that when you come into those new markets, you're coming in with a good light and, offering something new and another option for maybe somewhere that only had local businesses before.
So what do you find that most people often assume that they know, but they actually get wrong when they're learning how local SEO works compared to traditional SEO?
I think something, not that they get wrong, but I think that sometimes when people think of local SEO, they only think of Google My Business or Google Business Profile, which is a huge part, right? It's a huge part of a local SEO strategy. However, I think that there needs to be more of a big picture approach, and, making sure your GBP is top notch is effective. We know that Google, that's, where it's at. You want to be in the local pack. But I think that you can't ignore some of the other platforms, especially depending on your industry, right? There's those industry specific directories. If you're like a restaurant, again, spa, gym, Yelp is going to be something that you want to make sure that you're on top of. Same with, ABC and Bing Places, again, depending on the industry and your audience, people are still going and getting that information from those platforms. So I think that although I love GPP, I think it's great. I think we should always be making sure it looks good, constantly monitoring, updating it. You can't forget about those other platforms, and even, thinking about local directories too. If you guys are opening a business in a shopping plaza, you need to be listed in their directory. Those local backlinks matter as well.
Are there any other parts that you think that, like the disconnect between the two, any common mistakes that maybe you see or things that you wish worked better together?
I think sometimes the relationship between the corporate site and the location pages, can be a little bit tricky. A lot of times, depending on, the approach that some people have used, you can see those kind of, I call them like microsites, but you'll see basically the corporate site like rebuilt on a location page, as subpages of a location from everything from, the about us to the blog to the service pages. And I think that causes, although it makes sense why that like approach would be used, because you want to keep people on that location page. You want to make sure they're getting the information. However, a lot of that content is just duplicate, right? It's the same thing. It's something that they could have got from internal linking, going to the corporate page, having just the information on the page, and learn more buttons. And I think it causes a lot of issues with, crawling when you have thousands. It could be thousands if you have hundreds of locations of just duplicate content. And you can see, in a Google Search Console that although it's there, maybe, if you look in analytics, people are going to it, it's not helping your SEO efforts because it's not getting indexed. So I think that kind of relationship and coming up with the balance between going back and forth between like internal linking with corporate and location pages can be a challenge and something that people need to really think about with their site architecture.
Yeah, for sure. There isn't just one answer to that, I guess, because I've sort of fell down the rabbit hole of like franchise care where it's linking back to like a page on a certain type of care that sits on the primary domain, and the person wished that they could put geo modifiers in, but that doesn't, you can't, because obviously it's the page that exists next to the root. It's a generic page. And they're left with just like one page, which they need to include their geo modifiers and about 1 million terms. But it's hard. Some of those franchises could come up with the internal resource to actually build out some really solid content for that franchise. And a lot of them don't. They can't do it. And that is why they are restricted just to this one page, because exactly that what you're talking about is no one has the big picture view in terms of, that might seem nice for you as a franchisee, but that site isn't going to get, we're not going to get those pages indexed. It's not really going to serve you or give you value. Goodness me, the struggles that must be. I'm sure that you've sat in on some of those conversations for different organisations. There isn't just one model, is there, for how that can work?
No, there's tons. And again, it's client by client, kind of the big picture plan. I do think that, on at least your service membership pages, etc., you should always have call to actions to get people to location pages, right? Whether it's the finder, the box where you type in your city name, things like that. I think it should always be, especially on those, a site that has local pages, it should always be like a click away on how to get you there.
Do you find that many franchisees go rogue and buy their own domain? And then that's another thing to do with local SEO versus SEO, is that the problems that can be created by someone wanting the flexibility of their own website. Have you seen that happen a lot?
Sometimes I think you see a lot of duplicate like GBP profiles. That happens a lot, whether it's just mistakes or things like that. I think that happens. There's always a lot of cleanup on who owns it, right? Especially if corporate doesn't own it. You run into that where it's like, maybe we're like a Yelp partner and we have all of these businesses, but then we're finding all these other pages that like aren't part of that platform. So having to run that down and, explain why we don't want that is always a challenge. And I think with the Google My Business like websites, when those were kind of like first introduced, I think that caused a lot of that kind of like duplicate site issues, at least in my experience with like business owners that had access.
Yeah, part of that was beautiful, but part of that was also quite
I definitely understand. Yeah, I definitely understood the concept and what it was for, but it could cause some issues.
Yeah, for sure. Just because I feel like it's time that we had a rant, because you're too nice, Dayna. Not enough ranting from you. I'm going to give you a chance now. I would like to take your hand and lead you to a special place called Room 404, which is the place where you get to abandon your least favorite marketing, SEO concept, idea, or phrase. You hate it. That's a strong word. You really intensely dislike it, and you'd like me to fling it into room 404 to never be seen again. What can I place in room 404 for you, Dayna?
It's not as particularly related to local SEO, but it's something I've come across a couple times and I particularly don't like. And it's domain purchasing and then redirecting back to the main domain. I understand variations of maybe your brand name, owning things like that, but I've run into, before we can call them maybe domain hoarders, people that just um, buy up keywords, keyword related to their domain. Is that you? Okay.
Maybe 20 years ago.
Well, it still happens. So, and you get this, maybe you don't know about it, and you get this backlog of just hundreds of domains that are purchased and were bought specifically to be a little spammy. I think it's that and like buying backlinks are my two like biggest pet peeves with.
Okay, I'm going to take them. I'll take them both. I'll just take
All
them
right.
both. We'll just fling them away. We'll fling
All
them
right.
away. Maybe that was something that 15 years ago, maybe it did work. I don't know. Obviously, if you have an old domain that has some equity that used to be your brand domain, and there's all these reasons to do it. But
For sure.
do I need to buy, I don't know, best shed in Wales? Will that help me? No, it won't. Don't buy all those domains and redirect them unless you've been using them in previous marketing.
Yeah, and if you're going to do it, I mean, you have to vet them too, right? Like every domain has a history.
Yeah.
You don't know, I mean, you could be buying a manual action for all you know. I mean, things like that. I think that's why I don't like it. I think it's risky.
Goodness me, we've seen some things doing some link audits through the time, haven't we? So we're always saying that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to SEO because you have to say it at least once a day. It's just the law, quite frankly. But it is true, isn't it? And in local SEO, it's different depending on your region and your location. Do you see in particular any like economic or cultural factors that marketers need to consider more when they're developing their local SEO strategies for multiple locations?
I think, especially in certain regions where other languages are present, I wouldn't disregard having at least information on your website that says, maybe in the Texas locations, those ones that are kind of Texas, New Mexico, California, having information on your site that says, hey, we do have Spanish speakers or something like that. I think very small, very, tiny detail, but I think having that on your website shows that you have the ability to communicate with people. People are welcome there. I think that's pretty important. And then not so much economic, but I think when you're getting into the different regions of, especially, the U.S., getting into the different regions, I think understanding the kind of areas like a metro area, understanding the cities. Every city has, its little neighborhoods and pockets. And I think if you're going to be writing content in that area, especially localized content where you're talking about parking, the neighborhood, et cetera, using those actual neighborhood details, landmarks, et cetera, to really kind of paint that picture. Because although, you might be part of that bigger corporate entity, I think it's important to show personality and how you are connected to that local environment, whether it's through partnerships, et cetera.
When you're working on those bits of information with regard to like the geographic entity, let's call them, because everything's an entity, like the boroughs, or every single place has got different things. Like in the UK, it's like by postcode, by county, by country within the UK. When you're working, say, on a strategy that you're not 100% familiar with as an individual, I guess you need to look at the words that people use and the way that Google describes places. How do you go about getting that information How do you get it?
I think when you're thinking about how Google describes that information, you can search, you can do your research. When it's coming to maybe getting more of that, if you're lucky, you'll be able to create maybe surveys or have a way to talk to either team members, maybe team leads at certain locations, right? They can give you kind of that local perspective, whether that is, one-on-one interviews, whether it is a survey that you've created and you want people to fill out and they can help kind of paint that picture a little bit for you. Um, Again, with like franchisees, you have like your district, your regional kind of managers that can help with that. Again, I think it's a lot of just building those partnerships and understanding what information you have access to and what you might have to go do your own research on. And then always looking at your competitors. How are they describing, you know, certain things?
Yeah, I love that. Getting that's the well, is that the bit that's often missed? Is actually making sure that you have what do they call it, boots on the ground, so you're actually speaking to the people that are there. It's like, how do people refer to your location or your branch? Is there a word for where you're situated? The same way that you do sort of search query research, isn't it, really? But taking that very specific angle on what is this place called where we are. How do people, because locally there's all of these special words that people would refer to that, as a search marketer, if you didn't look there and you were looking at like search query data, you'd be like, oh, that just means that, and you're like, no, actually that's the word that people use to describe. Well, thank you very, very, very much. I feel like I could probably ask you a million more questions, but we are coming up to time. So I'm going to ask you if you would like to give a shout out to, it doesn't have to be a local marketer, any marketer or any other resources that you think people would find useful or that you would recommend. It's always just nice to get a little bit of insight into, who resonates with you and who you think is, worth listening to, following, or who's doing a good job.
Yeah, there's so many. I really love our industry, just the SEO industry in general, because everyone is so open to talking and saying, their thoughts, theories, what's worked, etc. I really like Women in Tech SEO. If you're part of that channel, they have a Slack group that is dedicated, or a Slack channel within their group that's dedicated specifically to local SEO. Always keeping up with things that BrightLocal is putting out. Joy Hawkins, Amanda Jordan. There's a lot of great people that I've listened to over the years, sometimes been able to chat with. And then in general, I think I'm really lucky because I get to work with the brilliant Lily Ray. So just finding those people, whether it's, Twitter, LinkedIn, conferences, I think there's a lot of information out there, and everyone has always seemed very willing to help and offer their expertise.
Brilliant. And thank you very much for offering your expertise and to be willing to help us to learn more about things. So a big thank you to you, Dayna, for being on today. And a big thank you to our listeners. We will make sure that we include all of the people that Dayna just shouted out in the show notes. So make sure that you take a look at those so you can learn more. And if you've enjoyed listening to Adventures in Local Marketing, which we obviously hope you have, if you could leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice, share it with a friend, listen to it with a friend. We think they might like it too. It obviously makes a big difference to us, and it helps us make even more valuable content for you. If you've got any ideas about guests that you would like to hear from or see, or topics that you'd like to get covered, then let us know. We have got an episode with Arij Abu Ali coming up, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on access to her brain, which is a very, very lovely brain. We will see you next time on Adventures in Local Marketing. I'm looking forward to it already. Thank you very much, Dayna.
Thanks for having me.